Hello DMs, welcome back to the Master of Dungeons. This week's video will be an analysis on the rivals from Call the Netherdeep, particularly their tier 1 abilities and how they are early in the game. I will eventually do a video on their tier 2 and tier 3 stats, but I'm currently running Call the Netherdeep for a party, so don't want to give the game away just yet. We'll look at each of the 5 characters, their strengths and best ways to use them and possible ways to play them. First, I want to give a shout out to the people on the Exandria Discord. It's a great Discord with a really helpful group of people. Here I found many discussing Call the Netherdeep and ideas and things on the server. Particularly the discussion on the rivals is a common one. New DMs have found it daunting playing 5 regular NPCs that appear continuously, but it doesn't have to be. For a start, your players will naturally gravitate towards some they find more interesting than others, which is also up to you how you play them. If you find certain rivals more interesting than the others, you'll play them that way, allowing for greater interactions with your players. They will learn more about these characters as time progresses. Personally love Irvin's story within the narrative, however my party weren't that interested in the human travelling with this group, so didn't really interact with him that much. On the flip, I find Io a little dull despite being the leader, but my players really latched onto her, so spoke to her quite a lot. You first meet the rivals in Jagao during the Festival of Merit. They're dotted around various locations of the town. Obviously it's up to you how you start your story, but I followed the book, which starts you at the pie eating contest. The book chucks you right in the deep end of the role-playing side of things when it comes to NPCs anyway, so it's going to be something you'll have to get used to as it is. Just like a Critical Role story, there is an abundance of people throughout the world, which is amazing from a story narrative, but can be a little overwhelming when you think about having to play all these NPCs. Here it introduces you to Irvin, who doesn't really talk, except a good luck he will speak afterwards, depending on how he does in the contest. He may speak afterwards. In my version, Irvin was sick after the contest, so just skulked off and didn't really interact with the party, and they weren't really interested in him. Next, when the party heads south to the riddles section, they meet Gal Saride. Within my party, we had a drow and a changeling pretending to be a drow, plus a wizard, so all 3 naturally gravitated towards him, interested in this character. In the challenge, he was impressed with anyone who won the challenge, but was a bit mocking of one of my party who used magic for a bit of help, which was returned to him later at the swimming challenge. After that, at the maze challenge, you meet Dermot and Maggie. My party changeling was also a cleric of the Luxon, so instantly had a connection to Dermot. Although I played Maggie as friendly enough, the party just saw her as her outwardly appearance as a big dumb ogre, so didn't really interact with her much, which meant that 2 out of the 5 could just fall back into the background a bit, so actually it only left me with 3 major NPCs to use for roleplay purposes, and made it much less daunting a task. Then it was on to the swimming challenge, and the party meets Io, which means they meet every member of the rivals fairly swiftly. And this is the first opportunity you can use one of her abilities if you wish. At the beginning of the race, Galceride offers to cast Longstrider on Io, which she declines as she wishes to win on her own. However, when the sharks are deployed and attack, there's no perceivable reason she couldn't cast Animal Friendship just to prevent herself from getting eaten from one of these sharks. I don't think as a character she'd cast it, get the spear and then use a shark to drag her to the end moving faster, but if you wanted to play her as a more unscrupulous character you certainly could. But Io also looks poorly on people who break the rules, so something to consider whether riding a shark would be in the spirit of the rules, although as the only rule is one person from a group, there's certainly nothing against it. After that you see the rivals a couple more times, but this is each person's major introductions. At the closing ceremony, the rivals and your NPCs are the ones chosen to be raced at the finish in the Emerald Grotto, and depending on who goes first, this could lead to your first combat interaction. Now, if the rivals are first into the grotto, Maggie blocks off the southern route to E7. It's entirely up to the party how things go at this point. They can follow her suggestion and take the other path, or insist on pushing past. The first thing Maggie has is tactical readiness, which gives her and allies within 30 feet advantage on initiative checks. And let's face it, unless something dramatic happens when combat starts, they'll all be within 30 feet. I'd go that one bit further and say that with the exception of something like an invisible person getting past her passive perception of 14, no surprise rounds against her or her party as long as she's conscious. She is tactically aware and looking out for danger. When the party arrives, she is blocking a path, so is definitely expecting trouble. She is tactically aware and looking out for danger. When the party arrives, she is blocking a path, so is definitely expecting trouble. Now, she won't attack unless attacked first, so if she happens to go first in initiative, have her dodge and then attack in response to your players knocking out weaker ones but not going for the kill. Now, this is probably the first real time the players influence the rivals' attitude towards them. Up to this point, the rivals don't know your players enough to become friends or enemies, but how they interact with Maggie will certainly lean them towards a stronger decision. If your players kill Maggie, just write in the story one of the elders took her out, healed her up and resurrected her or whatever. If it saves you having to come up with another stat block or random NPCs to add in and makes sense, it's a race and not a fight to the death. Have the elders admonish the players for being overly aggressive in what is supposed to be a friendly competition. The next potential encounter with the rivals is just before the grotto in the moon shark lair. If the party didn't fight Maggie, then all rivals will be here at some point. If the party goes at a fast pace, the rivals won't show until after the shark is defeated, so they won't see them in combat. If the party went slowly, they'll see that the rivals have hurt the shark and will then join combat with them, and at a medium pace they turn up part way during the fight to assist the party. If the party fights Maggie, just have them be at a slow pace unless they push really hard, and have them at a medium. The first thing you need to establish is how will the rivals react to any interaction with Maggie. If they chose a different path and didn't fight her, Maggie would go and catch up with her party, inform them that the players are in the grotto and the race will be on. If they fought Maggie and ran away, Maggie will tell her party, and if Maggie doesn't catch them up, the rivals will think the worst, so react hostile towards the party, and just try and win the race. If Io hasn't used her animal friendship, she'll definitely use it here and put the shark on the rival side. So when combat begins, first determine is Maggie there or not. If she is, then all the rivals get advantage on their initiative rolls as long as they're within 30 feet, which means they'll all have advantage. Before we look at everyone's stat blocks, let's talk about underwater combat. In the introduction, there's a section on underwater adventuring, and at the very start it mentions underwater combat in the player's handbook, which is at the very end of the combat section. In that section it tells you, unless you have a swim speed granted to you by magic or natural means, then your melee attacks have disadvantage unless the weapons are a dagger, javelin, trident, short sword or spear. I'd also include Io's harpoon in this because it's exactly what it's meant for, which means Iron and Irvin's melee attacks aren't at a disadvantage, not that it would matter for Io because she has a natural swim speed due to being a water genasi. And it also means that Dermot and Galceride would cast their magic to get around this restriction. Unfortunately, Maggie would be attacking at disadvantage, but she can always dodge or give the help action to mitigate this. With combat, we have Io first. She gets 2 attacks with either her harpoon or longbow. As mentioned before, she doesn't have disadvantage on her attacks, and if Maggie gives her the help action, she can then attack with advantage. Arrows from bows automatically miss beyond the weapon's normal range, but 150 feet is more than enough space in the lair. Assume beforehand she had good berries in her pocket. She can cast it once a day. They last for 24 hours, so she'd always cast it. Next, as I said before, she has animal friendship, and if she didn't use it earlier, now is the perfect opportunity to try and charm the shark to beat your party. With 2 attacks and a pretty solid swim speed, she can be your most useful character in the water. If she's attacking your party, she can swim in, attack and fall back. She'd recognise aquatic species and knows the sort of weapons that can be used in water, so would avoid those people, but when she swims away, any opportunity attacks would be at disadvantage if they don't have the weapons stated earlier. Next is Dermot. If the party comes in with the rivals already fighting the shark, assume Dermot has cast Bless on his party already, otherwise if he goes early enough in initiative, have him cast it then, preferably before at least 2 of your party members go. His best choices to cast it on would then be Io, Irvin and Galceride. If the rivals are indifferent, he'd hold off for Cure Wounds to use on your party, otherwise he'd hold it until one of the rivals really needed it. Again, if they're indifferent and you had multiple party members down, he'd cast Spare the Dying. Attack-wise, he makes 1 Warhammer, 1 Searing Wrath. His Warhammer attack would be at disadvantage, so he'd attack whomever was close enough and hope he hit. For his Searing Wrath, he'd target anyone at range who were a significant threat, particularly any casters like a sorcerer or a wizard, because blinding them would be a great benefit to hampering attacks against you. After Dermot is Galceride. First, as soon as the race begins, he'd cast Longstrider. It's non-concentration spell that will last an hour, so ideal for this situation, and he's smart enough to know his best choice is giving it to Io, as that'll speed her up significantly. As with all casters, Mage Armour is up at the beginning of the day, and he'd use Mage Hand only if the amulet had been cut loose and dropped. For combat, he'd open with Gravity Wave. He'd try to centre it on as many people as he could, and then on subsequent turn, he'd use Drain Potential and enjoy those temporary hit points. Distort Gravity he wouldn't use unless he were surrounded, and this wouldn't be much use in combat under the water, but better in the road to Bazzoxan. He'd also try and recharge Distort Gravity at his earliest convenience and use it again on any range groups that happen to be together. Next is Irvin, and he's very cut and dry. Makes 2 dagger attacks. If Maggie isn't giving help to Io, he would be an excellent choice. His follow-up poison damage will help, especially taking down any low HP or armour characters. And how does Irvin have this knowledge to work out who's easier to take out between a barbarian and a rogue? Well, there's Maggie and Galceride. Maggie has her tactical acumen, and Galceride has wizard brains and 200 years experience. So both could and would brief the rivals on what they believe the strengths and weaknesses of your group are, through their own personal observations, just as your party will probably try and figure them out too. Also, and this is my favourite part about Irvin, he's consecuted, and was actually a bugbear in his previous life, so has those experiences to fall back on too, so actually the rivals have a lot of tactics and knowledge to fall back on. Lastly, we have Maggie. As I've already mentioned, Maggie gives the party advantage on initiative, and in water until her tier 3 stat block isn't much help. If there's a barbarian hitting with Reckless, she can certainly swing her maul to cancel out the disadvantage, but otherwise dodge or help are your best choices. If combat happens on the road to Bazzoxan, then Maggie would use her tactical knowledge to knock down rogues and monks, but would know a paladin and a barbarian could resist being knocked prone, or toss a hammer at any bothersome casters, especially if Irvin or Io are about to go next and have advantage from that player being on the ground. Anyway, this has been my look at the tier 1 stat blocks of the rivals in Call the Netherdeep. These tactics would work both in the grotto and on the road to Bazzoxan. Soon I'll look at the other stat blocks, but hopefully this helps you get started in the game. Until next time, happy hunting. Please hit a like and a subscribe.